Hello and welcome to this session. My name is Carrie Bartels and I'm a trainer in Ex-Libris North America. Today I'll be introducing you to SFX. Please note that this presentation is copyrighted and is the confidential property of Ex-Libris Limited. Information included in this presentation is periodically reviewed and updated. You may share these training materials within your institution, but not beyond. In this session, first I'll talk briefly about what SFX is, and then you'll see how your users will experience and interact with it. Next, you'll learn how SFX works and be introduced to concepts and terminology that will help you understand SFX better. Lastly, I'll introduce you to the SFX implementation process, and we'll also cover at a high level how it works with Primo, which is Ex-Libris' discovery system. Then we'll just wrap things up, and I'll mention some additional resources that are available to you. The objectives for this session, the key takeaways are, first of all, understanding what SFX can do and how it works, especially in terms of SFX elements and terminology and the user experience. With the terminology, you'll see the SFX terminology throughout the documentation and the application itself, so it is important to understand what the terms mean. Also, knowing what to expect at the beginning of your implementation, and then knowing how SFX operates with Primo, and to begin thinking about a couple of options that have to do with SFX and Primo integration. The SFX Primo integration will be discussed more in a separate session. So let's start with what exactly SFX is. First and foremost, SFX is a link resolver. A link resolver uses the data in a citation from a database or a discovery system like Primo to find and link to related records, like the abstract or a full text, in a different database. And it can also link to a variety of resources, such as your library's catalog or an interlibrary loan service. SFX uses the OpenURL standard. And OpenURL is what makes open linking in a web-based environment possible. It provides essentially the syntax for transferring bibliographic metadata from one information provider to another. SFX provides your end users with an A to Z list of your resources, and it also provides library staff with tools to analyze your e-resource collections and report on their usage. So now that we've defined what SFX is, let's look at SFX from a user perspective. And we're going to look at the user experience from a couple of different angles. I'd mentioned that we're going to cover some SFX terminology, and the first SFX term that we're going to talk about in relation to the user experience is the term source. The source is where the user starts his or her search. And in this case, we're using the scenario where the user starts the search in an EBSCO database. So in this case, the source is EBSCO's Academic Search Complete, where the user is starting their search. The general workflow here is that the user does their search in EBSCO, pulls up a list of results, and sees a citation of interest. Now, because in this particular example, because the library doesn't happen to have access to the full text in EBSCO, the user only sees the article citation in EBSCO. But your library also has a subscription with Wiley, and Wiley has the article full text. So if you have both of these databases set up to work with SFX, so that would be EBSCO's Academic Search Complete and Wiley as well, your users will be able to click on the SFX button within EBSCO here and be presented then with a list of links to related records, such as full text or holdings information or other services. From there, a user can select what option they want to see and click on the Go button. And for the full text, as in this example, be brought to the full text in Wiley. In a similar way, your users may find a citation of interest while maybe searching your library's OPAC or Primo. So in the case of your library's OPAC, they would be able to click on the SFX button, very much like what we saw with the EBSCO example. Or in Primo's case, if the user is searching in Primo, brings up a list of results and is interested in a particular citation, they would click on View Online instead. When they click on View Online, this opens up essentially the SFX menu, so the list of options that are available to them. And then when they click on the Go button, So we'll say they want to see the Hindawi Publishing Open Access Journals option here. They want to see full text through that. They click on the Go button, and they're brought to the full text. So now that we've talked about the user experience, let's talk about how SFX works behind the scenes. SFX uses the information that it gets from the source system. So in this example, the user is starting their search in Primo, so Primo is the source. So the user would enter a search term in Primo. They would come up with a list of results and click on View Online for a particular citation of interest. When they click on View Online, it's checked, SFX checks to see if your library subscribes to that content. And again, this is done using SFX. If your library does subscribe to the content, it will generate an SFX menu with the link to go to content in the target system. And target's another term we're going to be talking about. This all happens very quickly, like within milliseconds. What the user sees is either the SFX button, in the case of our EBSCO example, or in the case of Primo here, the View Online link. So again, when they click on it, they're presented with a menu of options coming from SFX, and then they choose which option they want to see, in this example, the full text for. They click on the Go button, and they're presented with the full text of the article or whatever service they're after in the target system. The target is where the user ultimately wants to go. It's the service that they're looking for. And just in general terms, in the SFX menu that displays here, any of these options, any of these links that you see here are considered targets. So let's take a closer look. When the user clicks on the SFX button, or View Online, in the case of our example here in Primo, the source, so in other words, this is where the user is starting their search in Primo here, the source generates an open URL containing information about the citation. It contains metadata. And the types of metadata that might be in the open URL are the article title, the author, the journal title that the article is in, the ISSN, and page numbers. That open URL is sent to the SFX server, where the data from the open URL is augmented with other information that SFX can glean. So for perhaps from the SFX knowledge base itself or from an external provider like Crossref. So SFX gathers up all of this metadata and generates what we call a context object. Using the context object, SFX looks up the services that are available for this particular citation. So for example, the context object might include the ISSN of the journal that the article was published in. It uses the ISSN to see if your library subscribes to any database providers that carry the journal, and also whether full text is available for it, abstracts, perhaps library holdings, and so on. Any options that it can display to the user in the SFX menu. Once SFX has identified potential providers, it then uses what we call thresholds to determine whether or not the article itself is available from that provider. Now, thresholds are conditions, typically date coverages. And I'll go into more detail in a few minutes here. But in this particular example, if the article citation is from 2011, as it is here, SFX checks to make sure that you have coverage for that particular date. At that point, the SFX menu is displayed to the user with all of the options for accessing the article. When the user clicks on one of the links in the menu, and we'll see here, there's a couple of options here in the SFX menu. When they click on one of these options, in other words, one of these targets, a target URL is sent to the target so that the user can actually ultimately access the full text. Now, this target URL is slightly different from the open URL that's sent initially from the source to SFX. The target URL will typically contain additional augmented data, and it can also contain authentication information that is specific to your institution. So the user can ultimately, again, access the full text of the article. Since I mentioned open URLs, this is just one example of an open URL. And note that lots of metadata is contained in it. I'm not going to take you through every element that's listed here, but just to mention a few. First of all, you'll see here what looks like a URL, and this is your SFX URL. This is where the source is sending the open URL to your SFX application. Another element that you'll see here typically is SID. That stands for Source ID. That's where the user did their search and clicked on the SFX button. Now, in this case, it's a ProQuest database where the user started their search. And so so the user did their search in ProQuest, they click on the SFX button, and then ProQuest generates this open URL and sends it to your SFX application. So that's the SID, source ID, where the user started their search. Another element that you will typically see is a title. That stands for article title. So that's the title of the article listed here. ISSN, date, and this would be the date of the article. Volume, issue. S page stands for start page. You will also sometimes see E page, and that stands for end page. And then we'll see the author as well. And in this case, there are two authors, Susan Jaworski and Roberta Sullivan. And then the last element that we see here is J title, and that's the title of the journal. Let's talk a little bit more about SFX terminology. The source and the target systems are the beginning and ending points for your users. So again, the source is the database or discovery system, such as Primo, where the SFX request is initiated, where the user starts their search. The source can be a database like PubMed or EBSCO or Gale, or it can be your library's OPAC or Primo. The target is the database where your users find what they're looking for. So this could be the full text of an article, it could be abstract information, or it could be a service where they request document delivery or interlibrary loan. And again, basically any link that appears in the SFX menu is considered a target. Services is the next term we'll take a look at, and that provides the means of communication between the source and the target systems. It's connection information. Now for sources, vendors provide ex libris with the information used in the source service. And the source service defines and interprets the data that's contained in the open URL that SFX receives from the source. The target service, on the other hand, the target service structures, defines, and submits the request for what the user is looking for. So if the user is looking for full text or an abstract or other service, that's where the target service comes into play. While there are 24 different types of services, the most frequently used are listed here. So get full text, where the user can access full text. Get abstract, where the user would access an abstract. Get holdings, to see your library holdings. And then get web service. Web services can include, for example, a document delivery service, interlibrary loan form, or perhaps a link to your Ask a Librarian service. Services can also contain the authentication information that's necessary in order to connect to a database. And that authentication information is set up in what we call parameters. Typically, they're called linking parameters. And our last few pieces of terminology here, an object in SFX is a serial title or a monograph title. While your users might be searching for a specific article within a journal, SFX defines the object at the serial or monographic level. And along with object is object portfolio. An object portfolio is the collection of e-journals or e-books, in other words, objects, collection of objects associated with any given target or target service. So to give you an example here, EBSCO's Academic Search Premier's object portfolio for its full text service contains about 22,000 publications, or in other words, 22,000 objects or titles. SFX also uses conditions that are placed on targets, services, or object portfolios to ensure that users' requests can be fulfilled. And these conditions are called thresholds. SFX will only display a link in the SFX menu if that target, object, or service is available. And this availability is calculated based on your subscription to the target, object, or service, as well as the criteria defined in the threshold. Because objects are defined in SFX at the serial level, it's necessary to specify your library's coverage for those serial titles. So for example, your user may want an article from 1999. However, your library's subscription only goes back to the year 2000. So in that case, that particular target or service will not display to the user in the SFX menu because you don't have the date coverage for it. SFX has default, or in other words, global thresholds in place based on standard packages supplied by the vendors. However, your library's coverage may differ from these defaults. So SFX allows you to customize these thresholds and make them into local thresholds. Local thresholds will only override the global thresholds. They won't completely replace them. And that's just in case you ever want to revert back to the global threshold later on. The most common reasons to use thresholds are, first of all, when your library's coverage does not include the entire run of the publication, or maybe perhaps if you have an embargo. So date coverage is a typical threshold. When you know the name of the database, or you know the database rather, requires a specific attribute such as the author's last name or a volume or an issue, that's considered a need attribute type of threshold. And then the last type of threshold is authentication. And this is if you want to restrict access to a publication to maybe a smaller group of people or an individual within your institution. Typically what you will see, though, are date thresholds. So in other words, date ranges or your date coverages. We've talked about how SFX works behind the scenes as well as some important terminology, and we're going to revisit the terminology again in the Activating Resources session. But let's shift gears at this point and talk now about your SFX implementation. If you're just getting started with SFX, you'll be working with a project manager from Ex Libris to help you get SFX installed and configured at your institution. Now, the type of customer you are will determine how your implementation is run, as well as how much training you'll need. We'll take a look at the implementation workbook and the SFX resources spreadsheet, and these are just a couple of tools that will help you gather the information that your Ex Libris project manager will need in order to configure SFX. We'll also take a look at, just briefly, on how your off-site users are authenticated and how that authentication will work in SFX. For our total care customers, Ex Libris provides full software and hardware maintenance for SFX. So this includes software and hardware updates, as well as the maintenance of your SFX knowledge base. So we take all of those tasks off your plate and do them on your behalf. If you're a total care customer, we'll be configuring and customizing SFX for you based on your input and feedback that we receive during implementation. And since you won't have access to the SFX admin interface or the server, you won't really need to know how maintenance is performed because, again, Ex Libris will do that on your behalf. For our direct customers, we provide the hardware maintenance, so any hardware updates and things like that, while you retain control of the software and the knowledge base. So if you're a direct customer, we'll help you with your configurations and customizations, but we'll also show you how things are done in the SFX admin interface. But you won't have to worry about how to maintain the server because Ex Libris will take care of that for you. The third type of customer are local customers. Local customers have a local installation of SFX and are responsible for both their hardware and software maintenance. So if you're a local customer, we'll provide assistance and instruction for every aspect of SFX. Whether you're a total care or direct customer or you have your own local installation, when you start your implementation, we'll send you some materials that will help you get started with SFX. So this will include, in particular, the implementation workbook and the SFX resources spreadsheet. The implementation workbook is split into 3 sections, and you'll see those listed here. Each section is designed to collect the information that we need in order to configure and customize SFX for your institution. So you'll see here a section for SFX resources. So this is just information on what resources you have at your institution. SFX user interface, perhaps you want your logo displayed in the SFX menu. That's where that information would be captured. And then lastly, we have SFX authentication. So that would capture information on how you authenticate at your institution. Remember that we're here to help. And if you have any questions at all while you're filling out the workbook, please don't hesitate to contact your Ex Libris project manager. During your implementation, we'll also be configuring your resources in SFX, or in other words, activating resources in SFX that you subscribe to or have access to. When we send you the implementation workbook, we'll also include a spreadsheet called SFX Resources, as well as the instructions for how to fill it out. There are 3 tabs in this Excel spreadsheet, and you'll see them listed here. The first one is called Licensed, and this is where you'll see a list of target names and services available in SFX. The target names are titles of aggregator packages, so this will be a complete list of aggregator packages that are available in SFX. If you subscribe to one of these packages and you'd want it activated in SFX, you'll indicate that in the first column, column A. So you'll just indicate which ones you want to activate. You'd only indicate the standard packages in this tab. So for example, if you subscribed to Addis Online that we see here in line 18, you'd want that active in SFX then. So you'd need to make sure to indicate that in column A. Remember that the target has an object portfolio associated with it. So when we activate the target, we're also activating all of those publications as well. And keep in mind, again, this first tab has aggregator packages. So the idea is that you subscribe to everything within that package. You'll also notice the services column in column C, and this will typically say get full text, but in some cases there's more than one service available. So in this case, we have get full text as well as get abstract. You'll just need to indicate which services you want active in SFX, which services you have access to. And your project manager will give you more details on how to indicate which services that you want active in SFX. The second tab that you'll see here is labeled Free. So we see that tab here. And this is just a list of all of the free targets that are available in SFX. So if you would like any or all of these activated, you record your preference again in column A, indicating which particular targets you would want activated. And once again, if there are multiple services available for a target, you'll just indicate which services you'd like to have activated. The third tab is Select Titles. So we see that here. And notice this is pretty much a blank tab. In this tab, this is where you identify the titles that your library has purchased from individual providers. So these are not going to be aggregator packages. They're more going to be selective packages where you don't necessarily subscribe to everything in the package, just perhaps a few titles. So in order to set these titles up in SFX, we need just a little bit more information from you. So you need to fill out the fields as we have them here. So the ISSN, the title of the journal, for instance, the provider that the journal is coming from, the package name that the journal might be included in, the URL, and then the start and end years of your access or your subscription, the start volume and end volume, start issue and end issue if that's applicable as well. For example, just to give you an example here, most libraries that subscribe to Elsevier Science Direct or Wiley Online may choose individual titles from those collections. So the default vendor package may not be the same list of titles that your library subscribes to, and that's why we have a separate tab here. Again, these are just going to be your selective packages where you may not subscribe to everything, all of the titles that are within a package. In terms of authentication, SFX is going to pretty much function the same way as your licensed resources for your offsite users. So it's business as usual. For example, if you have previously required your offsite users to connect to your internal network via VPN before accessing licensed resources, that requirement is not going to change with SFX. If you use a proxy server to authenticate your offsite users before they continue on to your licensed resources, that workflow will also not change. And your project manager will work with you to configure authentication for your offsite users based on your institution's specific needs. The last topic is how SFX and Primo interact. And in particular, some options that you'll want to start thinking about if you are implementing both applications. Note also, again, that there's a separate session on SFX and Primo integration, and that will definitely give you more details. So we'll take a look at how SFX is accessed through Primo, as well as some of the settings in SFX that control what your users see in Primo. And then we'll talk about how Primo and or Primo Central rather and SFX work together. The first way to access SFX through Primo is the A to Z link, and you'll see that on the top right menu. This will give your users a way through Primo to search for a list of, for example, e-journals that you have at your library, that your library subscribes to or has access to. This A to Z list is actually coming from SFX. So that's one way that the two applications integrate. Most of the time, though, your users will probably be using SFX link resolving capabilities in Primo, and that's when they click on the View Online link, the SFX menu will display. One thing to remember is that the View Online link doesn't always invoke SFX. In Primo, it's also possible to use a URL in the citations record to access online content. So the user would click on View Online and actually be taken to the content itself. In this case, though, the giveaway that we're seeing an integration with SFX is we're seeing this SFX menu as an intermediate step. And again, the user would select which option they want to see the full text for. In this example, we'll say they want to see it from Hindawi, so they click on the Go button, or the hyperlink, either one, and they will be able to access the full text. If you've purchased Primo, when you configure the display for the SFX menu, remember that your users may be seeing the SFX menu embedded in Primo's search results, just like what we saw. It's also possible to control when the menu itself is displayed using what we call direct link. Now, direct link can be turned on and it can be turned off. With direct link off, the user will always see the SFX menu as an intermediate step between the source and the target databases. So in Primo here, when the user does their search, they come up with a list of results. They click on View Online for a particular citation that they're interested in. When they click on View Online, they see the SFX menu. This is with direct link turned off. When they're ready to see full text, they click on the Go button, and that takes them to full text. With direct link off, the user has the ability to choose which source they want to use, or which target, I should say, they want to use, and then take advantage of the additional services that might be shown in the menu as well. However, with direct link on, if you choose to turn direct linking on, the user will only see the source and the target. They will not see the SFX menu when full text is available. And with direct link on, the user no longer needs to make an extra decision on what option they want to choose and an extra click. They're brought directly to the full text. So again, using the example here with Primo, user does their search in Primo, they pull up a list of results, they click on the View Online link for an option that or for a citation that they're interested in seeing. When they click on View Online, instead of being taken to the SFX menu, they're being taken directly to full text. So again, they don't have to make any decisions about what particular option they want to choose from the SFX menu. They don't need to make an extra click. They're just brought directly to the full text. Also, during your implementation, you'll be asked whether or not you would like to register with Google Scholar, if you're not already registered with Google Scholar. And as a part of that registration, Google needs to have a current list of your full text resources. And within SFX, it's actually possible to generate and export a file that they can use, that Google can use. This exported file, it will contain active get full text data from your SFX database. and this is used to indicate in the search results when electronic full text is available from your library. The same file that's generated for Google Scholar is also used by Primo Central. So we kill two birds with one stone. The same file can be used for not only Google Scholar, but also Primo Central. Your project team will make sure that this functionality is set up for you. And you'll just need to let your project team know if you are registered for Google Scholar. We'll talk more about the Google Scholar and Primo Central process also in the SFX Primo integration session. This brings us to the end of our session. So just to briefly summarize what we covered, we looked at SFX elements and terminology. We looked at what SFX can do and how it works in terms of user experience as well as more behind the scenes. We looked at what you can expect at the beginning of your implementation, and we also looked at how SFX operates with Primo, as well as some integration options for you to start thinking about. For more information on SFX, the General User's Guide provides a great overview as well as general information about how SFX works, as well as the Advanced User's Guide, and that provides more detailed information. Both of these documents can be found on the Ex Libris Documentation Center, and the Documentation Center can be accessed from the Ex Libris Customer Center. You'll need a login, so if you don't already have a login, please feel free to contact your project manager. Thanks so much for viewing this session.